Good afternoon, everybody, in Year 13 Physics, Whangarei boys. Today is Saturday, the 5th of March 2022. I've had a couple of folk talk to me about the question 4 on page 93 of the workbook, and you might recognise this because I've done a little photograph. As you can see, it's not nicely scanned, it's just photographed and snipped. So this diagram shows a car, 16 kilonewtons. They've used G as 10, which is a bit odd, but mass 1600 kgs. Can run a bank bend on a horizontal racetrack. Radius of the bend is 56 meters, angle 15 degrees. Maximum speed possible, and the friction force between the tires and the track is 20 kilonewtons up this way. The vector diagram shows the forces acting on the car as it travels around the bend, and we're asked to draw the horizontal and vertical components of the reaction and friction forces. So just moving ahead a little bit here, getting my little PowerPoint working at the same time. If I then can take this little chunk here and expand it, we've got this thing here. Horizontal component, well, first of all, I'd like to restate the angle. It's 15 degrees there. The horizontal component of the friction force is best as I can make it that much. And the vertical component is that much. It's going down because the angle is pointed down. Similarly, the two components of the reaction force are there, horizontal and vertical. The part B of the question says, describe the vertical forces that are acting and state the direction in which they act. I've sort of done that already. Calculate the size of the reaction force. I'll do that in the second half. So, three vertical forces acting. They are the weight force, 16 kilonewtons down. The vertical component of the friction force, this is also down because the friction force is angled downwards. The vertical component of the reaction force is upwards, and that's what's supporting those other two. The vertical component of the reaction force carries the weight, and the vertical component of the friction force. If you look at this picture here, this thing here carries the weight force that they've drawn in, plus one, this little blue vector I put in here. And so the friction force, for the friction force, the vertical component can be found, well, if we have a sine of 15 as opposite over hypotenuse, which is going to be the vertical component divided by 20,000. So the vertical component is 20 kilonewtons, 20,000 newtons times the sine of 15. So the sine of 15 is about 0.26-ish. Vertical component is 5,176. And we add that to the 16,000 newtons of the weight, we get a total downwards force of 21,176 newtons. Now, we're not finished yet because that's the vertical component. We have to find the reaction force itself. Now, looking up here, if that's 15 in there, then that angle there is also 15. And for this angle here, the adjacent is the vertical component, and the hypotenuse is the reaction force. So cos, opposite, vertical component over reaction force, hypotenuse. So we can now rearrange that. The reaction force is the vertical component divided by cos 15. And there it is there, 21,176 divided by cos 15. The reaction force is that number there. The cosine of 15 is that number, pretty close to 1. The reaction force is 21,923 newtons, or as the answer book says, rounded to 22 kilonewtons. Now, part C of the question states, calculate the size of the centripetal force acting on the car. Well, that's coming from two causes. There are two contributors. One is the horizontal component of friction force, the blue vector, and the horizontal component of the reaction force, the yellow vector. We'll find the blue vector first, and I'm going to call that the horizontal component of the friction force, FFH. Cos 15. If we look at this angle in here, that's 15 degrees. There's that horizontal component divided by 20,000. So we can say that the FFH is 20,000 cos 15. Cos 15 is that from before. And we get 19,319 newtons. We don't round it yet because we're not finished. Let's put my face up a bit more upright. Moving along, so we also have to find the horizontal component of the reaction force, this little yellow vector here. So we look at now if this is, look at the triangle, this length here is the same as up here. So we can say that the sine of 15 is this unknown vector divided by this number we got before. So that's the reaction force. So it's that number times sine 15, and sine 15 is about 0.26. So we get the horizontal component of the reaction force is that. Add these two together, the total centripetal force, and I've moved my face out of the way, is a smudge under 25,000 newtons. Get back down in that corner there, maybe. Cool. And stepping along a bit, 25,000 newtons, as I said. Now, part D states, show the speed of the car is 30 meters per second. We know that the centripetal force is just a smudge under 25,000 newtons. We know the radius is 56 meters. We know the mass of the vehicle is 1600 kgs. And from year 12, the centripetal force is mv squared all divided by r. We can rearrange that and make v the subject of the formula, and I'm trusting that you can handle the algebra yourself. If you can't, please come and see me. V is equal to the square root of that combination, RFC over M. I probably should have put brackets around the stuff over there because my computer doesn't have a square root symbol, but you'll cope. So V is the square root of all those numbers. Put the numbers in, and I get 29.576 meters per second, or rounded nicely, about 30 meters per second, as they asked. Looking good so far. Part E says, show the speed of the car when the friction does not contribute towards centripetal force. In other words, imagine driving around the corner on ice is only 12 meters per second. Well, the centripetal force is provided only by the horizontal component of the reaction force, the FRH, but without friction. Now, there's official here. This is less than what we calculated above, because considering only the vectors for the reaction force based on the weight of the car, we have the vector diagram. I'll go back a step. This number here is less than what we had before because the reaction force includes the vertical component down of the friction force. If we take out the friction force, we take out the vertical component. If we take out the vertical component, this thing here shrinks and this thing shrinks, so our answer is different there. Cool. Considering only the vectors for the reaction force based on the weight of the car, we have a vector diagram here. So there's the weight, 16 kilonewtons. Fine. There is the reaction force due to weight only, and we don't actually need to find that. I don't care about that at the moment. But we do need to have the angle in here, and that's 15 degrees, because everything's at 15 degrees here. This is what we're looking for. This is a centripetal force caused by the horizontal component of the reaction force from the weight. So, and as I've said to you there, emphasize from the weight of the car on the bank track only, no vertical component from friction. I'll call that FCW, centripetal force from the weight. Using tan 15, this is tan 15 here, tan 15 opposite over hypotenuse, opposite over adjacent, my apologies. This thing we want, FCW divided by this thing we know, 16, rearrange. FCW is 16 kilonewtons times tan 15, and it follows that FCW is 4,287 newtons. Don't round because we're not finished yet. So we know that the V is equal to square root of RFC all divided by M. So V equals, put those numbers in, 56 over that. Feel free to pause the video any stage, good idea. And we get 12.25 meters per second, or about 12 meters per second as was asked for. We're doing all right. Second to last part, part F says, show that the maximum speed of the car if there was no banking would have been 26 meters per second. The friction force is 20,000 newtons. They gave us that in this picture here. And it's the only centripetal force in this case if the whole thing is tipped back upright. If there's no banking, so it's just, sorry, I'm pointing the wrong way, this way. No? Yeah, my image is flipped. So the force towards the middle is 20,000 newtons, which is a year 12 question. V equals the square root of RFC over M. Put those numbers in, and we get 26.46 meters per second, or about 26 meters per second as they asked us for. Part G, and second to last part, now we get to explain, describe, discuss, give reasons for. why banking a bend in the road has only a small effect on the maximum speed at which cars can travel around the bend. And I said, if the banking angle is not large, then the contribution from the horizontal component of the weight is pretty small. If you look at the friction force of the tires, they're much bigger. Now, finally, why does the reaction force increase as the car increases its speed above the no friction speed of 12 meters per second? And I think I accidentally covered that before. And here's my little summary here. As the speed increases past the no friction case, obviously friction increases. The friction force on a banked corner has a component acting downwards. If the friction force increases, that downwards component increases too. This adds to the weight force, creating what I'm going to call apparent weight. The vertical component of the reaction force has to carry this extra force, so the reaction force increases. I think I've answered that question. Hey everybody, I hope that's useful to you, and thank you to those people who asked me to do that. It's taken me a while to put this together, but I'm very pleased to be able to help. Have a safe weekend. I'm going to knock off shortly. Cheers, folks.